Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lower Your Shoulder podcast with me, Ben McKelvey.
And Jake Robbins.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
What does your creative process look like? Do you set aside time to do creative stuff? Or are you someone who's just like on a whim, picks up a guitar, especially to do with songwriting? Let's start with that. Like, how do you approach it in general?
So, admittedly, I've been a bit slack on this over the last couple of months. And, you know, funny enough, I got a tattoo done yesterday with a cool artist, great guy called Ben Ford, Cloak and Dagger in London. And he kind of grew up listening to punk music, and we kind of grew up in similar sort of, you know,
worlds.
It's similar worlds, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, we were both saying about how weird it is now that the art is like the thing you spend the least amount of time on.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, being a creative, whether it's, you know, tattoos or music, it's a similar kind of thing. We got into this because we loved making records.
Yeah.
And then we take those records and those songs out to the masses on tours and all that kind of stuff. But as any independent creative will know, you have to wear a lot of hats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of my time, basically all of it at the moment, is going on marketing what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And being creative is really tough because you can't, certainly for me, I can't put a time in my diary that I say, great, we're going to smash all this stuff at 10 o'clock on Friday, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., write some songs, get the demos over to you, we'll book in the studio. So it doesn't work like that, right? You know, I was out walking my dog a couple of days ago, had an idea for a song. I haven't been able to sit down and work out the chords for these lyrics yet because my diary has been clogged up with this stuff, and it is really hard. I'm finding it the hardest it's ever been to sit down and be creative.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. I mean, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, similar boat. It is very hard. It's interesting. Everything else you can set aside, basically time. You can easily sit down and be like, I need to schedule that out. I need to edit that video. I need to
Record a podcast.
Yeah, record a podcast. It's all stuff you can put aside and block time out. But the main thing we base this all around, the thing that we want to do the most, is quite hard to find the time, or you can't actually define the time. It's interesting. You said about going for a walk there, and that's actually when I'm most probably switched on and creative in terms of any songwriting idea, anything creative that I need to fix in terms of mixing, anything like that, because I think that time is when you're just removed from all the other stuff. There's none of that seeping into your mind. So like whenever I tend to do that, and sometimes it's forced and you don't feel like going for a walk, but when you do every time, it's similar to sort of, you know, it's another form of escapism to then do another form of escapism. It's quite weird.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, I'll come back and then like, if I'm switched on, you do have to be switched on to the idea that I'm going to get back and pick up a guitar. Like you say, you've still got that idea there, but it's probably going to be a slightly different idea by the time you get back to it. I find if you have that 20-minute window, it doesn't even have to be long, 20 minutes. As soon as you get back, if you've got an idea, hit record on voice memos, you've got something that you won't be able to capture later on in the day. It's
Do you find that your friends and family and partner find it weird how your brain works? Because I've been getting this a lot recently. Like I'm used to it, obviously, like just how I function.
Yeah.
But it'll be, you know, like me and my girlfriend were sitting like watching TV like the other night. It's like 9:30, you know, on a February evening. And then I like got up and had to quickly go grab my guitar and I wrote the chorus of a Christmas song. And then I sat down, did a quick voice note, recorded it, banged it, and then sat down like nothing happened. And she was just like, what just happened?
Yeah.
I was just like, I had to, and I've done it when I've been driving in the car, and I've been driving, I've been like, can you just write this down for me? And she'd be like, what? And I've just like churned out a load of lyrics. And she was like, okay. And I'm like, can you just send that back to me? Just send it on WhatsApp. It's like we were just driving along having a conversation about like, you know, something completely different. And but that is just how we work, right?
Yeah. I mean, that is actually usually when it happens. I can't remember what they call it, but it's like those tasks which you're actually doing something, but so your brain, one side of the brain's occupied, but the other part, left is the creative side, I think, right's the logistical, whatever. But yeah, so like driving, washing up, having a shower, walking,
Yeah.
all those things where you're like kind of preoccupied, but you're
It's almost an autopilot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're just doing it.
yeah, that's usually when your ideas come to you. And it is strange. And you can see how, you know, the really successful people start getting really spiritual about the idea, because it does literally come from nowhere a lot of the time. I think in some ways, you know, you have seen in TV shows or films, you know, stories about, oh yeah, I wrote this song, like I woke up and this song came to me. But that genuinely does
That's
happen.
Yeah.
It's more about, are you willing to get up and go pick up a guitar when the idea comes to you, or are you just going to let it go?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to bank a lot. Like the main thing that I write is lyrics, right? So I bank. It's a bit easier because I just bank lyrics in my notes on my phone.
Is that your starting point?
Yeah, always. Because the chords to me are like the bit that this. Because I'm not that melodic as a songwriter. I'm just like,
you're story driven.
GAD, whatever. It's just like, bang these out. These sound cool. This fits the mood of these lyrics. That's how I write. So I feel like it's a bit easier for me than someone like yourself. You're way more melodic than I am. And since we've been co-writing together, you know, I found that, you know, we are very different creatively in terms of how, like, the process, but that's why it works well.
Yeah, I guess interestingly, the thing that actually makes something stick for me, though, is still a phrase, one line or a title. I do need that bit of substance to like hold on to. Otherwise, it's just like, I can write chords all day, but it doesn't really feel like a song. So if I have that one bit of, you know, that one breadcrumb, which is like forms the identity of the song, if it's just a phrase, that I can then hold on to that and then develop it.
Do you find also, you know, like, and I know I've said this to you so many times, like over the years we've been working, when I've been like, oh, you know, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to do this, and then it, like, everything just completely changes. And I definitely find that's just when it's like that mood shift of, it's like not thinking about it. So, you know, my last solo record that I did when we did Fully Restored, I wasn't thinking about anything other than making that record. So it was like really easy because I was just like, cool, hit record, let's go. And it was like my favorite album that we've done. But then after that, I was like, I'm kind of sick of writing songs this way. And I didn't know what that break was going to be, but it ended up working with you, working with Mike, with Campaign for Nothing, and coming into that different role. But then, of course, now I've done that,
You're now like, ready for the other
I'm
bit.
like, I've written half a solo album, like out of nowhere. It's just like all sort of poured out. And I was like, I had no intention of writing that at all. I was, you know, I'm just in like, not a writer's block because I've been very creative, but I was like, I'm done with that for now.
Yeah.
And then it just comes back and it's like, I ain't done with you.
It's, you know? it's typical human nature. Like I've said to you before, like your last record is a reaction of what, you know, your next record is a reaction to your last record. You're like, I've done that, I want to do something else. So you react to it in the complete opposite way. And then when you've done that, you kind of go back to the other thing.
Yeah.
It's the same with everything, like eating too much of the same food, you then want the complete opposite. It's a similar thing.
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah. You're so right. And actually, when I was thinking about it, because I did like a video vlog to my fan club and just said, like, you know, what record would you like me to make next? Because I'm always in between being like the acoustic folk songwriter to being like a heavier, like rockier writer. And, you know, then I kind of thought, I was like, you know, with the position I'm in, it's like, you could just do both. Like my absolute dream would be to be like, if I had the time and I had everything in place, I would just love to be like, I'm going to put out an acoustic record beginning of the year and do a short run of acoustic shows. Then after the summer, I'm going to put out a much louder album and tour that full band. And if I could, that my absolute dream would just be do that every year.
Yeah.
Because then you wouldn't be like, oh, what kind of album should I do? You'd be you just do both and just tour it differently.
Well, I mean,
but it's like, you know, you've got to sell the tickets and stuff, obviously. But, you know.
But why not approach it like you could do an album that's half, down the middle, half.
Yeah.
Like you could do that as well. Like
I have, but I feel like I've done that before and been caught that I haven't leaned into it 100%.
Yeah, I don't mean like blend the two. I mean, like you could literally,
Oh, sorry.
like
Right.
literally like a half record where,
Yeah, right.
you know, that could be
Yeah.
really cool as well.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know, you could conceptually figure out what's the heavier side and they could be the light and shade. Who knows?
Yeah, that's
That
really
could
cool.
be cool. Like,
Yeah.
and then it takes the pressure of having to do a whole batch of songs in that same style.
This is also the classic overthinking
Yeah, of
as
course,
a creative,
but
because
that's it.
you think about your favorite artist, right? You know, and I think about mine. Whatever record they put out, I'm going to listen to it and I'll probably like it because I
Yeah.
really like them.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
I know.
Doesn't matter.
I know.
They might go, oh, we're on tour, and you go see him. You go, oh, it's just him and an acoustic guitar. Oh, that's really cool. And you walk away from the gig, be like, how was the gig? Oh man, it's awesome. And you go see him next time, he's got a full band. You're like, oh, that was awesome. That's it. I don't know why for the last 10 years, I'm just constantly like, oh,
I know,
what
but
should I do?
That is the life of a creative.
Who cares?
Everyone making records, if it wasn't thought that much, you probably wouldn't gravitate to what, like, your favorite artists think about it that much. Like,
No, I
don't
know.
get me wrong.
No.
I know what you're saying, but like the care and the thought is where the appreciation really comes from. Yes, some people are able to write, you know, a great song easier than others, but they probably have to wade through just as many songs. At the end of the day, like, it's something that I've had to learn is sometimes you just got to write until you find a good one. And all these thoughts that you have to go through are part of just getting there. You know, probably once you figure it out, it will seem really it always seems really obvious once you figure out what your next record is. But to get to that, you've got to like overthink and...
Yeah, I think that's why I've been a bit annoyed at myself not making time to sit down and play the guitar. Like right now, I don't even have a guitar in my living room for the first time. And it's not because of anything, you know, any kind of statement. It's just I literally haven't put it back since we put the Christmas tree away.
Yeah.
That's literally it. And that was, you know, in December. So I'm just put, if a guitar's there and I see it.
That's it.
And I've written, I reckon 90% of every song I've ever written that's gone out on Spotify watching TV.
So I was going to ask you that question. So like, no, that's cool. So like, I was going to ask, like, when do you write most of your songs, and is there a common thread? So you already answered that.
It's when I'm most relaxed. It's like put on, you know, mindless TV. That everyone's got those programs. That like
you've
just
seen
100
times.
You know, it might be like The Office or whatever, and you just put it on. You like can just zone out and you have a bit of comfort TV, right? And while I wouldn't, you know, say you want to do too much of that, for me, it's like end of the day for an hour or two. That's when I'm not thinking about anything. Phone's not even on, and that is where I've always written songs. I've always had the guitar next to me, and it just picked up, and it's just flowed out, you know, and songs that, you know, some fan favorites have been written in 20 minutes while watching an episode or whatever.
Yeah.
But what about you? Because I know you, from co-writing with I think you think about songs way more than I do, but that's because we're just different style writers.
I don't think it's just that. I think luckily for you, and this is the way you should keep it, is you're a guy with a guitar. And at the end of the day, songs are melody, lyrics, and chords. So like whether you write that on a piano, guitar, synth, whatever, like that is the main part of a song. So like you're able to just focus on that, the actual pure art of songwriting. You can then bring that into the studio with like, I've been listening to these kind of records, I'd really like to do this kind of thing, record this kind of way. But that's just how you dress it up. The trouble is, because I know too much of the other side, studied it for years, the mixing, engineering, mic placements, all this, like that thought process seeps in way too early at the beginning. I try my hardest to switch it off. It's easier when I'm writing with the guitar. You know, for some Vincent George stuff, it was more, like in the computer, in Pro Tools, in Logic, where, you know, you get distracted and you start playing around with sounds and it is fun. But really, that's the easy part. That's when the pressure's off. So nowadays, I really try to write the song first as far as I can take it until it's time to bring it into that, and then I can get excited by that. But
it's always tempting, right?
Yeah.
When you start to hear the song come alive in the studio, that little moment to me is the best part of the creative process.
100%.
Because don't get me wrong, I love writing songs and I love being in the studio and I love playing gigs and stuff, but it's almost like there's that moment where it comes alive, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's an actual thing.
Yes.
And it's also a really special moment when the song is still yours, but it's like alive.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and you said it before, and I never really thought about this, that once your song is out into the world, it's no longer really your song.
Yeah.
It's like everyone else's.
Yeah.
And there's that there's that moment, isn't there,
Yeah.
before that?
It's funny.
It's amazing.
And when it's in that state, if anyone else heard it like that, they'd think it sounds terrible because it's rough and it's raw. It's not that bad, but I just mean like
what are you trying to say, mate?
It's not finessed yet. It's not like.
But you can hear what it's going to become.
You know
right?
what it's going to be
Yeah,
like. There's
yeah.
a bit where you just know this is going to be good,
Mm.
and it's way before anyone else would know.
Mm.
And that is like the special part, I think, for
Mm.
sure. So like when you are sitting down to write those songs, and it doesn't matter that you're going through a period where you're not writing as much, but like, are you writing for escapism, for joy, for therapy, or is it just intrinsically part of what you do? Are you even thinking anything? Is it just what you do? Or do you not even think about it?
I think it depends when it's what's been happening in my life for me. Like it always started as an escape and as a therapy. So I guess that I would say I always drift back to that and it's like a comfort, right?
Yeah.
But it kind of depends where I'm at and what I'm trying to achieve. Like I've been in situations where I've been writing for the sake of writing when I was like, I need to finish an album or I want to write a song like this in this style. So that's what I'm going to try and do. Or, you know, but normally if I feel like my best songs I've written just to get myself through something and then gone, oh, that sounds all right, actually. And, you know, and I've written songs that have just been like, I've never been released. I've been like, I feel way better after that's come out. So,
well, that's cool. That's really cool. That's like a true pursuit of art because some songs you're like, well, that's just for me.
They're just too far too brutal and too obvious what they're about. Some of them I was like, I don't think I'd get away with that. So
maybe one day though, maybe there'll be a project where it makes sense.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally for me, it's therapy. It's for a sense of identity, holding on to what you view yourself as. That's a big part of it for me. I feel like if I'm not doing it, I'm like losing touch with who I am. So that's quite important to me, even if, you know.
Do you know, I've really felt like that recently.
Yeah.
And it's weird because in terms of how many songs I've been a part of that we're releasing on the label, I felt like I've been so creative. But because I haven't been doing my solo stuff, I feel like there's a part of me that's sort of in the shadow at the back that isn't really doing much. So I need to make more time to sit down and do that stuff. But what I was going to ask you is, with your songwriting career, obviously you've gone from, you know, let's take the producer stuff off the table for a sec. You've gone from being the lead singer in a pop punk band with Out of Sight to then moving into, you know, what, 10 years later with Vincent George?
Yeah.
Very different style, music and writing on your own, completely on your own, and now working with me. They must all feel like very different kinds of writing. Because even I felt that co-writing with you and with Mike for Campaign for Nothing has been completely different. But because I've always written and I'm still writing, I kind of always had that. Has that, you know, what that must be quite weird. How has that felt?
Yeah, I guess over the years I've done co-writing with other bands, other projects, not just bands, singers, and you learn something every time you do that. Even if it's a different way of doing things, even if it's something that you would never do and you might never do again because you don't like the way that person writes songs, you know, whether it's more like, let's approach the song from this way rather than, oh, what's going on in your life right now? Let's write about that. I think for me, I think sometimes why I take too long is I've always wanted to write very like autobiographical and like very true to me, because I don't know, my favorite artists basically almost embarrassingly wear their hearts on their sleeve, and I really admire that. It's quite hard to do because you have to be extremely vulnerable, which
Do you think that
which in turn, means that I probably haven't put enough out there at this point in time, because I mean, you're asking me about my songwriting career, which really isn't that many songs.
what I was going to say though is that in terms of wearing your heart on your sleeve, you know, do you think it's why you didn't do solo stuff sooner, because you needed to let yourself be vulnerable and you weren't quite ready for that, or was it just the timing?
I did write in that gap, in that time period, but I probably wrote my voice. I probably wrote my most raw song ever, and I sort of uploaded it to SoundCloud, but didn't really.
I mean, I never knew you did that.
Yeah.
What was the song called?
There's a song called Mistakes, and I probably will just upload it as Vincent George, but I kind of want to like redo the production. But then I didn't want to start with that because I'd sort of written these other kinds of songs. So like there's a batch of songs older that I need to just, you know, get to a little bit of time just to like tweak it a little bit, put it out. And I am sort of working on that at the minute.
Do you find it hard when you write a song in a certain mood and then you don't immediately release it to then release it at a later date when you're not in that mood?
A little bit.
Because I find that really difficult.
You do overthink that stuff. And I think, you know, the important thing nowadays is to get to a point where you're a little bit like, not throwaway, because that's got a negative connotation, but a bit more like, it's just a song, put it up.
Yeah, I feel like I've been really in that zone, and I wanted to, and we briefly talked about how we're going to do my next solo record together, and I would feel like we've worked together in like lots of different ways. You know, we've done the typical come in for 2-3 weeks, set up all the drums, track everything. Then we did Fully Restored, like completely different location, all really raw, and that was great. I would like to get into more of a habit of like, I've written this song because I really feel like this right now, and I want to come in and make this song, and I'm just going to put it out. And I think that creatives don't do that often enough or fast enough, and sometimes you can write your best thing in that space,
and then you hold on to it for ages,
and then you
takes like 2 years,
and then you go, oh, I don't really feel like this anymore. This is going to be a bit weird to release. You might have written about a period, like a tough period, that now you're out of it, or about someone, or do you know what I mean?
I do understand.
Understand.
I think that would be great for you, and you should do that until you get bored of doing that. But what I would also say is like, that song to everyone else is still a new song. So you just have to then talk about it reflectively rather than presently. So it's okay, because some artists and bands have a trajectory that they're on where, whilst I don't believe in holding on to songs forever, sometimes there is a song that's almost too good to come out too soon.
Funny enough, I felt like that even with Fully Restored. Like the song about a soldier called Good Boy Jack had been kicking around for nearly 15 years, and it just never felt right to release.
Yeah.
And then it was like, and I didn't change a word of that. No. But I think it's more like that was a story, right? Yeah. And I think that's easier to be like, oh, now is a good time to release this. I think when it's really personal and you've really meant it, and maybe you've like been a bit upset, or like you've really got out, I find it hard. Like I listen back to like voice notes I've got from like years ago that something might have happened, and I'm
hard to go back.
I really love that lyric, and I really love that song that I created there, but I just don't really feel that way anymore, and it's a weird,
I guess it's
space to be. Maybe it's classic overthinking it, probably.
Yeah, no, but I think in terms of that's a battle for yourself, but I think, you know, I would look at that in a positive way and be like, oh, look at all these great real ideas I have. Now I just need to finish them, like that is still a part of your life, whilst maybe it's just putting a positive spin on it where you are now from where you were.
Sure.
Like maybe that's what you need to do within the song. I don't know. But a song can just be like, that is that time in my life whilst I'm not going through it. Because in my opinion, music is supposed to help you get out of that. So like, if I was still living in that wallowing sort of self-pitying whatever moment I sometimes write from, then like it wouldn't be doing the therapy, because once I hear it back, that's the joy. So it like pulls me out of it, but the song still lives in that moment of sometimes sadness or whatever. So like, I know you said that to me in the past, and I think generally you as a person you're very good at staying positive. No matter what's going on in your life, you always find a way to like kick down the doors, keep going. And that is the lower your shoulder motto, you know, sort of way of life. Love the fight, lower your shoulder, right? And that basically comes from you. But sometimes I think it is okay to like, you know what I mean? Like not feel like that. That's the bit that snaps you out of it. But like, sometimes you need something to snap you out of it. If that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, that's all cool. I mean, I hope for your sake, like you can visit those songs, because there's probably some amazing stuff there. But I know it's a bit raw, but it's like, maybe it's just finding a way of approaching it that makes sense now, as opposed to,
I actually even feel like, just literally from having this chat, and I didn't know we were going to go down this road.
No, neither did I.
I mean, that's why it's cool doing a podcast, because you know, now I feel like even like what am I doing this weekend? I'm like, I got some time. I'm gonna have a look at some songs.
That's a brilliant segue, mate.
Yeah.
Because the next thing I want to talk about is basically that free time, right? So
this is twice now we've gone on to the next thing by accident.
I know, it's almost like we're getting good at this. So yeah, steady on.
Easy.
Yeah, like, as a creative, free time is very different for, you know, different kinds of people. You know, when I have the house to myself, or, you know, you got a bit of time to your own, the first thing is not, I'm going to call up some mates and go meet them, you know, rightly or wrongly. It's, I've got some time to do some music. I've got some time to pick up the guitar, create. Are you the same? Like that, those sacrifice, it's almost like the first thought is not, I've got free time to go have some fun. It's like, I've got free time to pursue.
But I think it's what, you know, we always say about, you know, about therapy, and it's the same, you know, whether it's the gym or taking a dog for a walk, or it's whatever makes you feel better, right?
Yeah.
So you should absolutely prioritize that when you have free time.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it's not even whether it makes me feel better, actually. It's more like, that's ultimately what I want to spend my time doing. That's how much it means to me, how much I value it. I would have a great time going to see some friends, but then I'd be like, I could have used that time to, which is, I'd say that's, you know, that's a big positive and a negative, because being social is positive. I'm saying this is maybe one of the, I don't know if it's a crux because I value it so much, but like there's been weekends, evenings, you know, my first point of call is always, I've got some extra hours I can,
it's,
you know, spend on
mate, it's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like all this stuff. And as you know, as creatives get older and life gets busier with kids and all that kind of stuff, it's still so important to have the social side of stuff, because firstly, you become a bit of a recluse. I've
gone through that.
Yeah. And it's that's not a good place to be in. But also secondly, you run out of things to write about.
Yeah.
If you're not going out and doing stuff, you can't write about like a story that you've heard or something that's influenced someone, or someone's going through something. That's how I wrote all my songs. I wrote a song called I Want a Divorce when I was 21. Like and that was from, you know, someone else going through a divorce that I heard about. And then it gave me an idea to put something together. And I was like, how can I make this kind of funny, but also sad? And that was like a challenge, but I wouldn't have I was 21 and I was just going to have a really good time at that age. So I was, divorce is the last thing on my mind.
Yeah.
It's just a balance that everyone kind of gets wrong sometimes.
I'm trying to let in a little bit of insight into like how my brain works in terms of like, I'm sure there's other creatives listening to this thinking that's exactly what I do. And that's like the way of life when you're creative. Like any bit of time, especially as you get older, it's like, and it sounds really bad to say, what do I value more? But it's like the constant battle is time. So if I get a moment of time, my first thought is that is creativity as opposed to social. And that may be really strange to a lot of people to hear that. People who don't have the creative thing going on in them constantly. Because I guess, you've picked up on it when it was like picking up the guitar whilst you're watching TV, I got an idea, or in the car, got an idea. That is, our brains are always going, always looking for that little seed, always trying to, subconsciously or consciously, is just always ticking.
Yeah.
And I'd say what's interesting with you is you are quite a forward thinker, which I find quite interesting because my brain is always going. I'm only in the present. I find it very hard to look past the first week. I think we spoke about this briefly on the first episode, but like, it's always just like looking, watching a film or TV. It's like, oh, what can I use? What can I hear the music?
I've taken lines out of TV shows for lyrics, and I think it's
but to be honest, that is ultimately how you have to be. You have to be like a sponge to everyday life, because there is magic in the mundane, and like all the best songwriters are able to take the most meaningless little human interactions and turn them into a beautiful song. That's what I believe is like, the best kind of way of basically writing about being human beings. Like, you think some of your best songs are real small, simplistic ideas, and when you land on that, you don't know where it's come from, and you almost don't have to say too much. You're just like, it kind of says enough. And I think that's the most
and I think if you don't make time to value the creative process, stuff can just eat you up quite a lot, and then you'll become frustrated because you're absorbing all these thoughts, and and that's I feel like at the moment. I feel like that at the moment, and even though it's been great coming in as like a co-writer with our two projects this year, I feel like somebody's just got to write a song about it. You just got to like get it out.
That's it.
And I haven't made time for that, and I think that's a problem for me.
Yeah,
that I need to like just sit down with a guitar for an hour a day, and it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, sometimes I'll just sit, and it's almost like, and it sounds really weird, right? But it's almost like stroking a cat next to you. That sometimes I'll just have a guitar and I'll be playing, I won't realize that I'm playing, and it would just be like just strumming some chords, watching TV. But then I'll be like, and I'll be like, oh, that's quite a cool little melody. Actually, do you know, I've got that lyric I wrote the other day. Let me see if I can pop that in there. But unless you actually do that, you won't be doing something else and then suddenly be like, oh,
that's it.
So you have to make time for that creative process.
I mean, I don't think I've realized that, but I guess that's essentially what I mean. Like, I'm constantly writing down little ideas. Like, I have voice notes for, like, honestly, my phone is full of voice notes. I'm sure yours is. I'm sure other people's listening. The frustrating bit comes when you're like, oh, I haven't actually worked. These are just little fleeting ideas. I haven't actually worked on them. And I think that's the time you have to set aside, is actually the work. I speak to Dan from Cusp about this a lot. It's like, the bit that comes to you from the spiritual thing, from nowhere, like, that's being tuned in to everything. But after that, you need to put in the work. And if you don't put in the work from that initial bit, all you'll ever have is little seeds of ideas.
Which is where a lot of creatives live.
Yeah.
It's in that land of
you
theory.
You do get that little buzz from the seed that comes, you know?
Yeah.
You get that little high of, I've written something.
Yeah.
That just, that need to write. And you go, thank God.
Yeah.
I've got a good idea.
And I guess like for some people, that's enough.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, I know a lot of people that just tinker around with the guitar and just are happy doing that. But if you want to be a creative, like an actual, you know, do it as a career or, you know, make a bit of a dent.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. You have to do you get to do the nice bit, but then you're like, now you got to put that into action and finish the song.
Yeah.
Go and record it or whatever.
Yeah. It's well, if you're interested in forming a dent, a legacy, like it's a lot of hard work. The fun bit is there, but like there is a rite of passage. You have to like actually give it some. A lot of these ideas can be found in Rick Rubin's book, which I have bought from you and you haven't read, but basically he goes on about this. It's basically an absolute Bible for anyone creative. I highly recommend it to anyone that, I mean, it gives you a way of life, basically. You'll never run out of ideas to find creativity from it. I need to revisit it. I've only read it once, but it is the sort of thing you can go back to. And it's basically all the stuff we're talking about. It's, you know, it's basically committing your life to art being the most important thing in your life. So,
while we're on the subject of Rick Rubin, I sent you a video of him the other day, and that really resonated with me. And he was basically saying that, you know, a lot of artists and creatives get caught, and I've absolutely been in this spot where you're like, oh, you know, I've got to make a living from this, so I'm going to stop my job and I'm going to go all in on this. And while that's a very brave thing to do, it's not necessarily the best thing to do. And even like artists that I've, you know, last year was like doing some management work for them and consulting and stuff. You know, a few of them were like, right, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go all in on this. And I was just like, then you'll have no money to do anything. I was like, how are you going to fund a record? How are you going to fund a tour? How are you going to fund your merchandise? How are you going to fund anything? It's like, but you have to just have that mindset shift of, and he put it so well when it was like, my job is to fund my creativity. It's just a thing I have to do. And then when you go and do the creative thing, the pressure's off. And I've done that. You know, I was working, you know, I've always worked for myself since I was 21, but I was a personal trainer and then went down to Brighton. I kind of jacked everything and I built a business over the last, I think, maybe 5-6 years. And I was like, right, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to move to Brighton. And then basically I just moved to Brighton to a worse apartment and then had no money and was then sitting down there writing fucking hundreds of songs being like, one of these has to land because I'm going to run out of money.
Yeah.
And it was like, why have I done that? Why didn't you just carry on doing that and just make more time and just do, I was like, you know, but it, you know, it makes sense at the time. Right? So I think, well, I've got more time.
I mean,
like,
I think most creatives would have tried that at some point, like, because I think at some point that is kind of put out there is that's what you should do.
Yeah, that's
you
commitment.
have to. That's
commitment.
yeah,
like,
exactly.
do you really want this?
Yeah,
and
it's
rubbish.
Not true.
It's you know, and since I've come back to doing the training, and obviously it's a lot easier because my business is all online. So I do have way more flexibility than I used to have being a PT. But now it's like the art can just be whatever you want it to be because you haven't got to be sitting there thinking this needs to make money. You just make a record that you really love. And when you do that, you will find other people that really love it. Yeah. You know, and I feel like
if you keep
so much
doing that
pressure's
enough,
off.
and if you keep doing that enough, ironically, that will build you a career.
Yeah. And you'll probably make more money.
Exactly. It's a common mistake. And also, ironically, by doing that and being like, I've got to write songs all day long, like you're saying, you're not even really living. And then that puts more stress on writing the songs that you can't write any songs. You're just like, well, that's just boring and sounds like the other song. Yeah. You know, so it's a funny thing. So it's a bit of a long one, mate.
No, it's good, man. We'll cut down a little bit. What else we got to talk about today? We've done nearly 45 minutes. Well, obviously, we'll cut it down a bit, but
So yeah, I mean, some other people might be going through. I'll say that again. So we
Take three.
So we spoke about this recently, and this is another thing that creatives have to sort of navigate and figure out, is explaining this way of life to loved ones, you know, girlfriends, boyfriends, close friends, parents. You know, it's quite an odd way of life if you're not tapped into it. And you know, we spoke about this in the car the other day, about for many years, through love, your parents would be worried about you based on the fact, like, you know, you're pursuing something and it's not necessarily bringing in the certain amount of income which they would like to see from you. Like, I guess, yeah, you've gone through that. Like, share how difficult that can be to keep persuading people, and now how do you go about dealing with that?
Well, I think first of all, there's a weird mindset of people that aren't in the creative space, which they call making it, right? And I don't know what that means, right? To me, it means, I'm going to start with that again. Can you ask the question again?
No, it's all
Sorry.
good. It's all good. It's all good. I did ask it in a bit of a long-winded way. I don't really know how to get to it, but I know what I want to ask you.
Well, it's really about the, like,
okay, now
how do loved ones understand and not be worried about what you do and that kind of thing.
So this way of life that we're talking about, this creative way of life, how do you go about explaining that to loved ones and, you know, parents and other people who might worry that you may be putting too much time into something that doesn't bring back enough financial benefits, or maybe, oh, it'd be better if you just put more time into something over here that brought more money back? Like, how do you deal with that? How have you dealt with that? And yeah, how do you sort of deal with that now?
To be honest, you just have to let it go.
Okay.
You know, you really do. Like, most people, especially ones that have never been in a creative world, will never understand what you do, because there's this kind of, you know, everyone, you know, anyone you talk about it with, you know, it's, oh, this must be so hard, really competitive. And there seems to like not be a scale in their heads. It's kind of like you're either an absolute no one playing in an empty pub with nothing going on, sleeping on a mattress in some crappy flat, and that, you know, it's like really
starving artist,
really starving, or you're headlining Wembley. There's no, like, you know, you can have like a really good career and make probably the same amount of money that everyone else is making, and it's like, well, it's almost just about you're not famous, so
it normally comes back to fame, not actual, and it's just success.
It's just people can't understand it, and that's okay. And I've learned to just let it go. Like, don't bother explaining it. Just get on with what you love doing and what you're good at.
So how would you, if I were someone to go like, oh, how's music going at the moment? Like,
I suppose it's great. Because it's pointless. If you try and like sit down and be like, well, you know, we've had to change our business plan around a bit because, you know, the royalties over here are coming down. But fortunately, we've set up a subscription business over here that's increased 25% over the last. What is the point? Like, what's the point? Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't, if someone said, you know, you'd be like, I don't know, mate, what do you do for a living? And they were a pilot. You wouldn't be like, tell me how the engine works. Well, who fucking cares? You know, it's like, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And they won't care anyway. Like, they're just being polite. So I just go, oh, it's brilliant.
I guess,
and I know what you're trying to get at.
No, it comes from a place of love, right?
Cool.
And they just want to know that you're doing well and then that you're okay. I can't remember how you explained it to me, but you were just like, you sort of put it in a box of like what you say to your dad now, which I think is like, I can't remember what you said. Can you remember?
I can't remember saying that. I think it's more that it's sometimes, to the people that care about you and you love equally back, sometimes it's easier to just not give the details, because it changes so frequently. It's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to call people up every time there was good and bad news, like, they'd just be like, well, how can you deal with that? Even Mike, like, you know, who's, you know, in Campaign for Nothing with me, he, you know, I remember we came off a tour once, and I think it was an arena tour that we did. It was just like, you know, absolutely amazing. And he turned around to me and was just like, that was absolutely amazing, but I don't know how you do it. I don't want to ever do that again.
Interesting.
I mean, obviously, since then he's changed his mind. Jumped on tours ever since. But it was more like the ups and downs and the constant pressure of things. You know, we had, you know, I was dealing with some crap PR company that was putting people on the list of a show that then the tour manager, they weren't checking with me. So then the tour manager was kicking down the door and being like, there's 3 people waiting outside, you haven't put them on the list by 4 o'clock. And I'd be like, I don't know who they are. And then I'm calling up the publicist, be like, who are these clowns? And they'd be like, oh, they won a competition in newspaper. Like, I didn't tell you could do that. And then, so it wasn't like, oh, we go on stage, play a show, have a beer. It was like all day you're dealing with like these little things. And yeah, when people see that and you let them into that side, they'd be like, oh, I'm really worried about that. There must be so much pressure. But I bet if we went and sat in an office of like some of our, you know, mates and stuff that are dealing with like high pressure work situations, you must be like, I think you need to take some time off, man. It's like really intense. But it's just because our jobs aren't seen as normal jobs. And because people can't put you in a box to be like, that is exactly what you do, it worries them. You know, or confuses them. And to be honest, it's okay. Like, just let them be like that, and you just carry on. It's difficult though, and like, you know, it has been
I think luckily now, you know, after a long time of pursuing it, I think it's more in your 20s. You know, that's a time where people are like, or maybe your early 30s, where people are like, okay, are you really committing to this for life, or is this just like, is it time to give up now? That's usually what crops up, right? Is it time to get a real job? Is it, you know, that whole argument? But I guess this whole conversation is trying to explain this is really just a way of life. No matter what else we're doing, we both still need to be creative, because if we're not, a lot of things gets bottled up. A lot of thoughts stay inside and they don't go anywhere. So like, actually, for our benefit and our happiness, because like I said to you before, some of them, we have more laughs than anything when we're doing this, you know, like that is sometimes hard to understand because they only see the public aspect of it. But like, my best moments are in the details, are in like the little bits that kind of no one gets to see. And as a producer, like in a studio, those are like, you know, whether it's in the studio or in a van, in a car, and you just bond with someone, you have that bond for life, and you have some of the funniest laughs over something so stupid.
But I don't think that worry and the confusion comes from what we actually do.
No.
I think it's from people thinking of the financial uncertainty, which there is, because, you know, if let's say, you know, you're a touring artist, right? And you normally go on 2 or 3 tours. You know, I'll talk from my experience of it, right? You know, you get to a point where you're doing 2 or 3 big tours a year and you're like, things are looking really good. You know, I started playing my own shows and like, you're like, oh, you know, doing well, right? And then suddenly you're not, right? And you're out of work. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to have to really change around the way I do stuff. That's the bit that people then go, oh, it's really uncertain. But the thing is that they could lose their jobs tomorrow. The company could say, sorry, we've got to make cuts.
Yeah.
That office is closing. Everyone's made redundant.
Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it.
It's the same. It's like, there's not really any more risk, providing you can do your job well.
Yeah.
You know, anyone can get sacked or be out of work.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. Even slightly different, but even when I first moved down to Brighton, I was trying to rent an apartment with someone, and the estate agents wouldn't take my, you know, you have to show your earnings, right? So I'd be like, oh, this is my PRS like statements over the last like year.
Yeah.
I'm also renting a property which is providing an income. So here's everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, well, we can't accept that. I was like, well, why? And they were like, well, we can't accept music royalties as guaranteed income because that might change or stop.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, and also when you're renting a property, we can't take your rental income as guaranteed because they might move out. And I was like, that's absolute madness. I was like, first of all, he's locked in for 6 months. So it is guaranteed. And secondly, I was like, their financial situation can change tomorrow. Anyone could be made redundant. Anyone can have an accident, God forbid, and wouldn't be able to work or whatever. I was like, so then, and then, then they're like, oh, you got to pay a year of rent up front, which I had to do. And then people wonder why creatives, then they'd be like, oh, it must be really tough. It's like, well, it is. You haven't had to do what I've had to do, have you? It's like all that money that's in my bank, I've had to put into rent. And you're like, so I mean,
you're always dealt bad hands as well because, society doesn't help you out either. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're just self-employed. You're self-employed like any other tradesman. Yeah. We might just do loads of different things to have different streams of income. I think luckily that's becoming more of a norm, no matter what you do, if you're an entrepreneur in some sense, because at the end of the day, we are forming brands, your art is a brand and, maybe that's something which artists have to get used to more and more these days, but ultimately it is a brand. And the more you see it as a business, and the more you see it as a brand, and that's slightly moving away into a different topic, but that is ultimately what it is. So I guess if society can view art more as brands, then it would help everyone because it maybe be more like a genuine... It is
catching up. And the more you start dealing with, younger accountants and, things like that, I mean, just better.
Yeah.
But like, it's just more up to date, right? It's difficult to explain, to people, especially if they didn't grow up in that world of, online businesses of like, and subscription business and all that stuff has only like boomed the last however many years, right? So to the people that didn't grow up with, the internet, might find it quite confusing to be like, well, you're not working. And no, I am. I work from home. What does that mean? It's like, things change. So yeah, I think the bottom line is, if any creatives are struggling with that kind of thing, struggling to explain themselves to other people and dealing with people acting worried about them and stuff, like it does not help us, when people are putting that on you. And honestly, my advice that I've learned to do is just go, everything's great. And just get on with your day. Honestly.
Yeah. Cool. We haven't got too much more, but so I just want to go over a few things I've learned over the last year or so to like make myself a better creative. Things that took me years to adopt, basically. And, one of the biggest cruxes for creatives is perfectionism. And, this is the overthinking perfectionism. It's got to be perfect. What I've learned is form a rule, basically, and I took this from Pat Kirsch from The Main. He said on his own podcast, the 8123 podcast, he would rather have an 80% rule. He'd rather get things to 80% and be able to move on to the next and do more with his life than to try and get something to 100% and never do anything. And since I heard that, I've really tried to adopt that. It is hard. You may have to form a 90% or a 95%. But the point being is, like, the more you do, the easier it is to let go. And my trouble has been, like, I haven't released that many songs. So the less you release, the harder it is to move on to the next because you put so much behind that next release. But the more you kind of get through it, the quicker you can just be like I was saying, that's just a song. People can enjoy it for what it is, on to the next. That's the song, still do all the stuff around it and obviously care about it. But like, remember that some of the greatest moments in music have been mistakes and imperfections, whether it's like, Cash or Dylan, which are like two very human sounding voices. They wouldn't be what they are if they were today tuned perfectly and perfect takes. And it's like, it does take in a way of adopting because you have to view yourself in a certain way to be that.
With that in mind, you're exactly right, and I've normally been quite good at that in terms.
Yeah,
of I
you're
can be
way
like,
better than me at that.
It's done, and it's the best it's going to be.
Yeah.
Or at least we need to push on. In terms of like working to percentages, which kind of goes with this, is that last year when I needed to have a bit of a life reset, I got a big whiteboard I've actually got over there, and I put basically everything that I'd achieved on one side of the board, and it was to do with how many songs I'd released, how many videos I'd put on YouTube, what like my fastest 10K running time was, my body fat percentage, how many books I read, anything that I could monitor with a number that was to do with my mental, physical, or emotional health, right? I made a big list, and then all I did was say, right, 2023, I'm going to make everything 10% better. That was it.
Yeah.
That was all I was going to do.
Cool.
And I hit every single one.
Awesome.
And then I felt amazing at the end of the year. The only thing I didn't do is I didn't finish I read 6 books in 1 year, and I was like, I want to read 8, and I didn't finish the 8th one. I'm really annoyed. But the point is that,
But you wouldn't have read the 6 without that.
Exactly.
Number, right?
And, I think, but that was like, it's like putting songs out. I'm not trying to just put songs out for the sake of it, to be like, well, I need to put 26 songs out this year because I did, 20 or whatever last year. But it does get to a point you're like, if you need to build your Spotify presence up and you need to put more songs out, you're going to write that one that one that people absolutely love by getting the other 10 out of the way. And you got to just keep pressing on.
Yeah.
And it's like, the job's done.
People like the journey as well.
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
love the journey. And I need to learn from my own advice. Sometimes it's hard to listen to your own advice, but like people love seeing an artist get better over time. And also another classic thing to happen is this, you hear it all the time. The song that people expect to do well doesn't, and the one that they didn't expect to do well is the hit. You hear that countless times with artists because the intention with that song wasn't either. It was just to write a good song. Every time it was just to write a good song. But what happens once it's released is like down to, like you're saying, pass it on. It's everyone else's now.
With that 10 to 20% thing, I think it's really helpful as well, because when let's say that you're like, oh, okay, I wrote 20 songs last year and I'm going to try and write 24 this year or whatever. And then you put them out. Each time that you put a song out, you kind of subconsciously get better at promoting it, because you're like, oh, this is what we do now. Like we do these posts before it goes out. And actually that worked out quite well last time. So everything gets better.
Yeah.
If you read more books, it's not about reading the book. It's about that you're having more words in your brain constantly in your brain.
Yeah.
So when you sit down to write a song, you'll be able to articulate yourself better, and you'll be able to pluck out words and phrases that you wouldn't have had in there before. And then because of that, songwriting's easier. So you can knock out more songs. And then when you put them out, you put them out at a faster rate. You're learning how to use Pro Tools faster because you're having to get them in. And it's like everything gets better. And then because of that, you feel really good because you're like, oh man, I can't believe I got 2 songs out this month. Then you're like, oh, I feel really great about myself. Then you'll go down the gym and then you'll have like a better workout because it's like, then you come out and then because you've had a better workout, you'll be like, do you know what? I'm going to eat really well. And it's like, and then you sleep well because you feel like you've accomplished something. And I really think that it's a really great thing if you can do that. And even if you start with 5 things that you just want to get 10 to 20% better at, over a whole year, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
I find it's been massively helpful.
I guess with your thing is quantity. So actually, by lowering the perfectionism gets you through more. So what I'll say, the 80%, 90% thing, I would say anything creative, there's usually a point where you get to, and I'm going to try to describe what that 80, 90% part is. It will be like, this is basically done. If I spend another 2 months on this, it might improve 3%. But
is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Or is it just better to just move on and do more? Because I guarantee you'll feel better for doing more than you will be pulling your hair out with, whether it's a little EQ or changing one word, which in the grand scheme of things, once you zoom out And once you revisit it in years, you won't remember that one thing you've thought over for like 20 days, just like, oh, I need to change. Should it be he or should it be it?
People use that. So many creatives use that as an excuse to not get things out the door and over the line.
Yeah.
And
I'm guilty of that.
Well, we're all guilty of that. Like I've written, before we did the Fully Restored album, I was moving in a direction that was like way like heavier. And I wrote, 7, 8 songs. We even tracked some, but I was constantly like, oh, this doesn't quite feel right. And how are we going to do it live? And then you fart around with like thinking about stuff and going into too much detail that you get to a point where you're like, mate, just bring the mics over. I'm just going to do an acoustic album. And you're like, it's probably the best album I've ever written. And it's like, and it absolutely far from perfect. But that was what was perfect to me about it, As Noel Gallagher says, mate, true perfection. Wait, what is it? Hang on. What is it? Fuck, what's the line? I just had it. It's the little by little line. True perfection has to be imperfect.
There you go. So yeah, just as sort of, we're going to wrap this up in terms of this episode with a few final thoughts, kind of going back to, we're trying to share our experience with what people might be going through, and also share our experience so people who have people close to them to understand what they might be going through. But I'd say this right here is a prime example of finding someone who's like-minded to help reassure you that you're traveling along the road that you want to. Like, find a community, find a friend form friends like who view life the same way as you do. And that's really comforting to me, that you're someone else who still views life in a similar way, where we've got to create. It's like there's no excuse for it. Like, we'll find time, we'll drive here,
and don't get distracted by bullshit either.
Yeah.
Like, we're surrounded by, we've talked about this a lot, and I think it's even should be a podcast in its own right about the mental health side of what's thrown at us as like creatives. I know we've like kind of briefly covered that, but you're just surrounded by it all day, every day, on Instagram and adverts and people, it's like, have things that they don't need, and it's like more all the time. And then you get under, financial pressure to be like, oh, I need this and I need that. It's like, it's fucking nonsense. You're all going to be dead one day.
Exactly.
Just make loads of records.
And do what you want to do, ultimately. I guess, look, we are here if you want to reach out and you want to form that community with us, because we want to do that ultimately. We want this to be a safe space, like-minded space for anyone who's feeling like we're feeling, who wants to push on, but maybe second guessing because maybe there's other people around them have grown out of it, or they've gone into other jobs, or maybe you feel like you're the last one still doing it. Luckily, Ben moved back from Brighton and we reconnected again. I still saw him a lot back then, but I think now more than ever we're more in tune with each other and what we're trying to do, and that is like so valuable to me in my life. It's like a constant in my life now, whereas maybe in the past it's been like here and then it just...
Well, I'd come in, make a record, go tour that record, call you up 6 months later and say, cool, let's start the next one. Whereas, now it's like, let's build something together.
And it really feels like that. So I guess find your own Ben and build your own thing. So I hope you're all enjoying these episodes. We wanted to get back to sort of, this will be like more the foundation of what we do, amongst interviews and little stories and road trips, which will be in there, which may be some of the more fun episodes. This may be a bit more of a serious tone, but I think it's really good for us to talk this out, and hopefully you like the conversation. Like and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to start putting these out on YouTube as well. If you want to watch it whilst you're eating your dinner, who knows? We will be putting out our first On the Road podcast, but we've got to do another podcast before then, before we can put that out. But I'm very much looking forward to sharing that with you. Listen to Campaign for Nothing's new single, Never Let Me Down. Watch the video on YouTube, which has just gone live. And thanks for listening.